So I need to make sure that I have enough items to keep up with all these new clients.
Woo-wee! The sun has just come.
What's up, squirrel?
For more than a decade, Brandi Passante was one of the most recognizable faces at any storage locker auction in America, the sharp-eyed bidder who could size up a unit through a few inches of open roll-up door and decide in seconds whether it was worth the risk. But long before Storage Wars made her a household name, and long after the cameras stopped rolling on her most famous years, Brandi's life off-screen looked nothing like the confident, wisecracking persona fans grew to love. Behind the eye rolls and the sarcastic one-liners was a woman quietly juggling motherhood, a business, a crumbling relationship, and a level of public attention she never asked for. So when people ask why Brandi Passante really stepped back from the show that made her famous, the honest answer isn't one dramatic moment. It's a slow build of pressure that had been stacking up for years, finally reaching a point where something had to give. Brandi's story starts far from any auction house. She was raised in a working-class household, and by her own description, her upbringing was rough around the edges. Money was tight, and the environment she grew up in taught her early on how to hold her ground and read a room quickly, skills that would later serve her surprisingly well in a business built on fast decisions and thick skin. Long before television ever noticed her, she had already developed an eye for value, spending time at garage sales and flea markets learning to spot things worth buying and reselling. That instinct wasn't manufactured for a camera crew. It was built through years of ordinary, unglamorous hustle. In the late 1990s, Brandi took a job at a carpet cleaning company in Tustin, California, and it was there that she met Jared Schultz, the man who would become her partner both in life and in business for the better part of 2 decades. According to Brandi's own retelling, Jared pursued her persistently until she agreed to give him a chance, and what began as a workplace connection eventually grew into a genuine relationship. The two went on to have 2 children together, Cameron and Peyton, and although they were together for close to 20 years and were widely seen by fans as a married couple, they never actually made it legal. That detail stayed mostly under the radar for most of their time on television, only becoming significant once their relationship eventually fell apart. In February 2010, Brandi and Jared opened a thrift store in Orange County called Now and Then, built around buying out abandoned storage units, sorting through the contents, and reselling anything of value. It was a real business, not a stunt for television, and it was born out of financial necessity during a period when the broader economy was struggling. That business is what eventually caught the attention of producers scouting for a new reality series centered on storage locker auctions. Jared was the one who initially drew interest, but once cameras started rolling, Brandi quickly became just as compelling to watch. She wasn't loud or reckless like some of the other bidders. She was calculating, skeptical, and unafraid to call out a bad decision when she saw one, and audiences responded to that authenticity immediately. Storage Wars premiered in December 2010, and almost overnight, Brandi went from being a stay-at-home mom helping run a small thrift shop to a recognizable face people stopped in grocery stores and parking lots. She has said in interviews that she never expected the show to become as big as it did, and that level of sudden public recognition took some adjusting to. Still, she stayed with the series and quickly became one of its most consistent and popular cast members, known affectionately by fans as one of the sharpest bidders on the show. Part of what made her stand out was how differently she approached the job compared to some of her co-stars. While other buyers leaned into theatrics for the cameras, Brandi treated every locker like an actual business decision. She'd study what little she could see through the door, weigh the cost of the bid against the odds of finding something resellable, and walk away from units that felt like a bad gamble even when the room's energy was pulling everyone else in. That instinct wasn't an act. It came from years of real experience buying and reselling second-hand goods before television ever entered the picture, and it's a big part of why she earned a reputation as one of the more level-headed personalities in a cast full of big characters. Other original buyers cycled in and out of the show over the years, some losing screen time, others leaving the franchise altogether, but Brandi remained a constant presence, which only reinforced her standing with longtime viewers. It's also easy to forget, watching the polished, edited version of the show, just how physically unpleasant the actual work could be. Storage units that go to auction are often abandoned for a reason, and buyers frequently find themselves digging through dust, mold, broken furniture, and genuinely unpleasant conditions, sometimes spending thousands of dollars on a unit that turns out to hold almost nothing of value. Brandi has spoken candidly about how draining that side of the business really is, both physically and emotionally, and how that grind doesn't let up just because a camera crew happens to be standing nearby. Add an occasional friction with other bidders at auction, and what looks like a fun treasure hunt on screen was, in practice, a demanding and sometimes thankless job that she was doing day after day while also raising 2 children. The dynamic between Brandi and Jared was a major part of what made the series work. Their constant bickering, his impulsive bidding against her more cautious approach, became a signature element of the show's appeal. But that on-screen friction wasn't purely for entertainment. Off-camera, Brandi was often the one managing the practical, day-to-day responsibilities of raising 2 kids and helping run a growing business, while dealing with the added complication of being followed by cameras. In 2014, A&E gave the couple their own spin-off series, Brandi and Jared, Married to the Job, which followed them at home and at the store rather than at auctions. The show lasted only 1 season. Brandi later said the experience of having cameras in her home, capturing everyday chores, parenting stress, and arguments, felt far more invasive than filming at an auction ever had. She has openly discussed how the demands of the production schedule at that time meant 60-hour work weeks and long stretches away from her children, including missing milestones like her youngest daughter's first day of kindergarten. That kind of exhaustion, she has said, played a real role in wanting a different pace after the spin-off ended. By 2018, though the public didn't know it yet, Brandi and Jared had quietly ended their relationship. Because they had never legally married, there was no formal divorce process to signal the split to the outside world, so for nearly 3 years, viewers kept watching them appear together on screen without any indication that their real-life relationship was already over. It wasn't until the premiere of Season 13 in April 2021 that Brandi confirmed on camera, simply and without much fanfare, that she and Jared were no longer together. Once that came out, a lot of earlier footage suddenly read differently to longtime fans, and the show shifted into a new phase where the 2 former partners bid against each other as individuals rather than as a team. Just weeks after that revelation aired, the situation escalated further. At the end of April 2021, according to police reports and later news coverage, Jared showed up at an Orange County bar where Brandi was spending time with friends. Reports indicated an argument broke out and that Jared allegedly shoved Brandi before leaving the scene ahead of police arrival. He was subsequently charged with misdemeanor domestic battery by the Orange County District Attorney's Office. Jared denied the allegations, and it's worth noting that a charge is not the same as a conviction. But the incident, combined with the recently revealed breakup, cast the couple's dynamic in a much more serious light for fans who had spent over a decade watching their bickering play for laughs. Not long after that season aired, Jared's presence on Storage Wars faded, and he did not return as a full-time cast member, though A&E never issued a detailed public explanation tying his departure directly to the incident. Brandi, for her part, kept working. She continued bidding on the show, now building a stronger identity as a solo buyer rather than one half of a well-known pair. She's spoken candidly in interviews about how different that felt, saying that having full control over her own wins and losses at auction gave her a sense of freedom she hadn't fully had before. It also coincided with a period where she began speaking more openly about the toll those difficult years had taken on her. In conversations with outlets like The Dad Diary, she described effectively being a single parent well before the public breakup became official, handling the daily realities of raising Cameron and Peyton largely on her own while the cameras kept running. She has also spoken about the strange adjustment of fame itself, describing how once ordinary errands turned into moments where strangers would recognize her, comment on her appearance or her personal life, and treat her as public property rather than a private person simply trying to get through her day. It's also worth remembering that Brandi weathered a genuinely ugly ordeal years before any of this became public knowledge. Back in 2012, at the height of her rising fame, a man named Hunter Moore, who ran a website notorious for posting non-consensual explicit images and video, published a clip he falsely claimed showed Brandi. She learned about it through a flood of disturbing messages from strangers online. Brandi sued Moore, seeking $2.5 million in damages for false designation of origin, defamation, and invasion of privacy. more largely ignored the legal process, and a federal judge ultimately ruled in Brandi's favor by default in 2013, issuing a permanent injunction ordering the content removed and barring more from distributing it further. However, the court found she hadn't provided sufficient documentation to justify the full amount she sought in actual damages, and she was ultimately awarded just $750 in statutory damages, along with coverage of her legal fees. It was a legal win that came with an outcome many observers, at the time and since, have described as painfully small given what she'd been put through. Years later, Hunter Moore would end up facing separate federal charges related to computer hacking and identity theft, for which he served time in prison, giving the story a delayed sense of accountability that had nothing directly to do with Brandi's earlier case. Taken together, these are the threads that actually explain why Brandi Passante's relationship with Storage Wars changed over the years, rather than any single dramatic walkout. The demanding filming schedule of the 2014 spin-off genuinely wore her down and cost her time with her kids that she couldn't get back. The slow unraveling of her decades-long relationship with Jared played out privately for years before the cameras or the public caught up to it. The 2021 incident and the domestic battery charge against Jared added a layer of real-world seriousness to a show that had always leaned on their chemistry as entertainment. And underneath all of it was the ordinary, exhausting reality of running a physically demanding business, digging through moldy, filthy, sometimes genuinely upsetting storage units, while also being a full-time parent under constant public observation. Brandi has been fairly open in interviews about dealing with anxiety and attending therapy during some of the harder stretches of this period, which only underlines how much was happening beneath the surface of the confident, quick-witted persona viewers saw every week. What makes Brandi's story stand out, though, isn't just the list of hardships. It's that she kept showing up. She didn't vanish from the show entirely, and she didn't let any single event define her. Instead, she gradually rebuilt her role on Storage Wars as an independent bidder with her own voice, eventually appearing again in later seasons of the franchise as one of its most recognizable original cast members. Her bidding style itself changed with experience, becoming noticeably more patient and calculated compared to her earlier years on the show, a shift she's attributed to simply having learned, the hard way, how quickly a rushed decision can wipe out a good day's profit. Off-camera, she's continued exploring other projects, including podcasting, and has spoken about feeling more settled and in control of her own story than she did during the most turbulent stretch of her television career. There's also a smaller, quieter thread running through all of this that says a lot about why Brandi has stuck with the auction business as long as she has, even through everything else going on in her life. She's talked about how the real draw was never just the money, but the mystery inside each unit and the occasional thrill of stumbling onto something with real history behind it. Early in her career, before she fully understood the market, she once found a set of old black and white postmortem photographs from the 1800s tucked inside a unit and, unsettled by them, simply threw them away, only learning much later that items like that can carry real historical and monetary value. She's cited that moment as a lesson that stuck with her, a reminder that in this line of work, the things that look easiest to dismiss are sometimes the ones worth paying the closest attention to. That kind of curiosity, she's said, is part of what has kept her coming back to auctions even after so many years and so much personal upheaval. So when people ask why Brandi Passante really left, or scaled back, or seemed to disappear for stretches from Storage Wars, the truth isn't nearly as tidy as tabloid headlines might suggest. There was no single scandal that pushed her out the door. It was years of accumulated pressure, a demanding job, a collapsing long-term relationship that played out mostly in private, a frightening public incident, and the ordinary weight of raising 2 kids while millions of strangers watched her work through it on television every week. Brandi Passante didn't walk away from Storage Wars in some dramatic final scene. She simply kept adjusting, kept working, and kept protecting the parts of her life that mattered most to her, even while the cameras kept rolling. And by the time she returned to bidding as her own person, no longer defined by a partnership the audience thought they understood, she seemed to be doing it with more patience, more clarity, and a version of herself she'd earned the hard way.